first speaker, who is Tony Brandt, who's visiting us from Rice University. Anthony Brandt is professor of composition and theory at the Shepherd School and artistic director of Musica, a contemporary music ensemble. His works include chamber operas, orchestral pieces, and compositions for dance, television, and art installations. Honors include a Kusevitsky Commission and grants from the NEA, Houston Arts Alliance, and MacDowell. He's also co-author of The Runaway Species with neuroscientist David Eagleman. Brandt has published on music cognition and has organized 3 international conferences on music and the mind. So please join me in welcoming Tony Brandt. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. Amazing to be on the last panel, taking in so much incredible information. I just wanted to walk you through a little bit about me. I'm a composer, as you just heard, and some of the pieces I write, performers wear wireless mobile brain body imaging. This is something that I spoke about in the conference prelude on Thursday. You're seeing there a slide of dancers wearing it with live visualizations of the data. So when the slide comes back, there's what we call a brain synchrony meter at the top that's showing in real time how much the 2 dancers' brains are aligned. And then we'll go to the next slide, and I've also done pieces where it's actually the musicians who are now wearing the mobile brain body imaging. I've also done some experiments with Moby in the next slide. This is an experiment where a pianist improvised variations to classical and jazz themes she was seeing for the first time while wearing the Moby equipment. And I have done some other experiments. This is from an NEA research lab where we gave composition workshops to seniors with mild cognitive impairment to see whether that gave any advantages in terms of their cognition. I've written papers and book chapters on music cognition. That's the next slide. For instance, about music's relationship to early language acquisition. As you heard, I have a book on creativity that I wrote with a neuroscientist called The Runaway Species. It was really fun to hear Mr. Henniger earlier today keep saying that we bend and break in music, because one of the main theses of the book is that all creativity involves some combination of bending, breaking, and blending previous source material. And so he kept repeating that, and I went up to him afterwards and I said, that's in our book. And then if we go on, you'll see, go ahead through that slide and then the next one. I've also written some journal articles about creativity, and we go to the last slide. Been interested in comparing human and AI creativity. So for instance, I wrote a paper that took a look at an AI realization of Beethoven's 10th Symphony from sketches he left when he died. And I compared it to Beethoven's 9th Symphony, which was the one he wrote just before that. And part of what stimulated me to write the paper was one of the people involved in the project said that nothing knew Beethoven's mind better than the AI other than Beethoven himself, and I wanted to see if that was really true. And then another paper was discussing something about how, although large language models and the human brain both work on prediction, large language models aim for the mainstream. They aim for consensus. This is something that's come up over and over and over again in the conference, whereas humans are able to go for outliers, or what Mr. Henniger called edge cases. And I tried to figure out why that is that happens, and I used 3 pieces of music that have very unusual things that happen in them to discuss what that might be. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tony. And I think we'll just go in order. And so our next speaker will be Chris White, who's visiting us from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Chris is Associate Professor of Music Theory, and he holds a PhD from Yale. And his recent book, The Music in the Data from 2022, explores big data approaches to understanding how people hear and write music, and has received an award from the Society for Music Theory. He publishes for music perception, music cognition, and music theory audiences. He has a new book forthcoming called the AI Music Problem, right? Yes, the AI Music Problem, coming out in a couple of months with Routledge. So please welcome Chris White.
Oh, thank you. So I've been thinking about how to, some of the ways that people have been talking about music theory, musical creativity. And if we're talking about musical creativity, we're often talking about it in two dimensions, in terms of usefulness and in terms of reordering. And this is due to some really seminal work by Margaret Bowden. One of these axes sort of places things along whether they replicate the input, the source material directly, or whether they reorganize it. So like a music box or a mechanical organ, it replicates exactly what you put into it. If you ask it to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, it will always play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. On the other side of this axis, you could put Raymond Scott's electronium, which is this hulking analog machine that would like chop up musical melodies and then give you back some new re-chopped up musical melody. This has been thought about for a really long time. When describing the very first computer in 1842, the Charles Babbage analytical engine, Ada King, the Countess of Lovelace, was writing that she believed that artificial intelligence or computers would never really create original content because they're just reordering what's fed into them. And in this sense, this axis is focused on the process. What is it that's underlying the mechanical process? The other axis that we usually talk about is whether it's useful or not useful. Tony suggested that that this is better thought of as satisfying versus unsatisfying. I think another way to think about this is that the music does what I expect it to do, given what I want to use that music for, and then not that. In my book, I call this conforming to expectations versus not conforming to expectations. And so, like, the music box here maximizes this because it's doing exactly what you want it to. It is playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, whereas the electronium, by just like chopping up music in random, its source material in random ways, is not really giving you necessarily coherent musical expression. This is the focus of the imitation game, the Turing test, because we're focusing on the user and the interpretation. Does this music smell right to you? We can then put both of these on two separate axes and then say that what is creative maximizes both of these. It sits in the upper right-hand corner there. So a music box is not creative because it maximizes conforming to an expectation, but it minimizes replicating its input. Whereas the electronium maximizes reorganization, but minimizes conformation to expectations. It's not satisfying. And other things can be situated in this graphic where like musical dice games might sit in the middle. Maybe chance music sits down here. Don't come for me, John Cage fans. But we think of generative AI and human creativity maximizing these two parameters. These two axes have mostly worked within music and AI research in the past. I think, though, that these worked until generative AI got so good that it began maximizing both of these dimensions, and we still intuited a difference. And there's plenty of psychological research that backs this up, that we perceive AI-generated content when we know that it's by AI and differently than when we think it's by a human. And so I would suggest that there's a third axis at work here, intentionality. I base this on David Dennett's concept of the intentional stance. So for instance, we interpret a car engine igniting differently than when we interpret a human turning a key to turn on that car. One is mechanic and one is intentional. We take an intentional stance towards things that we believe have an inner life. The car doesn't have an inner life, the human does. We have an empathetic relationship to them. We share that inner life with them. We don't empathize with the car, we do empathize with the human. That create content through that experience. The car is not creating anything through a past experience. That person is turning on the car because of some kind of experience in the world. This also has a long history. In 1949, when describing the newfangled calculating machines that had helped win the war, George Jefferson, the professor of neurosurgery, wrote that the mind of the mechanical man would never write a sonnet or compose a concerto because of thoughts and emotions felt. No mechanism could feel and not merely artificially signal grief, be warmed by flattery, be made miserable, be angry or depressed when it cannot get what it wants. And this is focused on the relationship between the user and the creator. And I think that's kind of a different thing. So generative AI might maximize these parameters to create creativity, but I don't think it becomes intentionally creative. intentional artistic creativity comes when we empathize with the inner life of the creator. We believe it to be making something that connects to our lived experience. When things optimally or usefully satisfy some sort of expectation or maximally recombined, they will still fall short of this intention. And I think that this shows a potential gap between human and mechanized creativity, and I think this is especially true in music. This is particularly pronounced in music because so much of what we like about the music that we like most is a connection between the listener and the creator. Music is often a social event. Music often tells stories. It embeds cultural histories. Music sparks emotional empathy. And so the distance between intentional artistic creativity and mechanized creativity will therefore be especially gaping in musical media. Anyway, that's my pitch.
Fantastic, thanks, Chris. Wow, we're going to have a great discussion. This is wonderful. Okay, great. So our next speaker then is Tristra Yeager from Rock, Paper, Scissors. Tristra is Chief Strategy Officer at Rock, Paper, Scissors, a music innovation PR agency, and co-host of the Music Tectonics podcast, with 2 decades of PR experience and a doctorate on performing arts in Siberia and Mongolia. She specializes in cross-cultural storytelling and tech insights. Her work has secured thousands of media placements worldwide. She's passionate about writing and continues to create in her spare time, blending her love for music, science, and society into compelling narratives. Thanks so much, Tristra. I look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, thank you so much. One of these things is not like the others, and I am sadly not a brilliant thinker about creativity. However, I did want to present what I think is an important part of this conversation, which is what are everyday people, what are the normies, what are the randos doing with these AI-powered apps and tools that we've been talking about all day. So for non-musicians, people that don't have a lot of technical background in music, don't think of themselves as musicians, may not even enjoy music all that much, like they don't go and look for those 5 new albums, but in some ways are starting to engage more and more with music and audio. I think this part of the world, this part of our space is important because, I mean, I don't want to whip out my favorite buddy, Walter Benjamin, but I just did, okay. But we're looking at what the quote unquote masses are doing, to use an old school word, will also have deep implications on how we frame, think about, and engage with AI, moving forward. So all of this is important and it all has its place. So hit me, Tyler. Okay, I'm from Rock, Paper, Scissors. I have to show my logo because we're like a for-profit company, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, hit me. All right, so in recent years, after recorded music became mainstream, how did people express their musical creativity if they weren't really musicians, didn't play an instrument? So exchanging music, trading records, more recently making playlists or mixed CDs, mixtapes. If you're of my generation, my heart goes pitter-pat when I say that word. There's also performing recorded music in different ways. So things like karaoke or lip syncing, which is the foundation of everybody's favorite app / nemesis, TikTok, right? That's how TikTok began, was lip syncing. And there's also what I would call playing with music. So lots of folks who wouldn't have considered themselves a professional producer or music maker loved to make remixes. They put together DJ sets, sometimes quite artfully incorporating music that was recorded by other people. And my personal favorite is mashups that began in the early digital music era and really played around with our notions of genre and what sounds and feelings could go together. So a lot of these, that's where intentionality comes into play big time. So hit me. Tyler. There we go, sorry. So I want to talk about how AI is switching up some of these different means. And this is these are kind of random buckets. I'm sure there are more. I'm sure we could argue about them. And we're academics, so maybe we'd like to do that. We can do that after the panel. So first of all, I would add Suno and Udio to the bucket of exchanging music. So the way a non-musician tends to use this is much like they use a GIF or a meme. So I want to generate a country song about trad husbands in French. Right? So you don't know about the trad husband trend yet. Okay, don't worry, I'll send you a track. So you don't just find a track on Spotify, YouTube, or on your CD collection. You generate one that's perfect for the occasion, maybe to troll your friend or to celebrate something really silly. Also, most human beings are interacting now with recommendation engines, the dreaded algo. And we could make the argument that, at least in the public discourse, algorithms as the recommendation engine type algos are seen as hampering human creativity and defining us, and sort of in that sort of convergence mode, right? Bringing our tastes all into the same dreary, flat, rose gold, monstera leaf, lo-fi chill point, right? So in some ways, this is like the AI has almost had a countervailing influence on how we exchange music to express ourselves. So next slide, please. Performing recorded music has gotten really interesting after AI. So for instance, I mentioned TikTok has become an algorithmic powerhouse, and it sparked a whole new set of audio expressive cues and behaviors surrounding music and self-expression. So if you're into TikTok, you will hear young people using audio in wildly creative ways that they're very fluent in, and often for comedic effect. And I think that's a really interesting development that is already having an impact on music and will continue to. Karaoke has also been supercharged thanks to STEM separation, which Matt Henniger of Moises talked a lot about. So a whole music business ecosystem is evolving around STEMs, how they will be used, could they be licensed, how will they be sold, could they be sold individually, could they be used as perks to build super fandom, that kind of thing. And the interesting thing about karaoke too is in this new, very fluid moment for the music business, instead of a very limited catalog for karaoke, which was seen as very down market, it's like dial tone, like ringtones. It was like, ooh, so it's stuff like My Way or The Final Countdown. Karaoke is now able to offer hits almost instantly. So, you can do all of Chappelle Roan now. And that is because both stemming, making AI stems has gotten so easy, and they're high quality, and they can use the actual studio recording instead of a shitty sound to like backtrack. Oh no, I swore, I'm sorry. Okay, I've been trying to avoid that all day. All right, next slide, please. Last but definitely big change is playing with music. So AI allows almost anyone to start playing around with the speed and with effects like reverb. So already on a DSP Audio Mac, and this is coming on Spotify. Spotify's kind of been leaking this. You will be able to remix songs. There are also apps that allow you to legally make mashups and share them with your friends, like Hook or Mashup. Hook just got $3 million in investment, by the way. There's also all sorts of new apps that allow you to beat match or to craft a DJ set in a more automated, fluid way for non-experts. So DJ would be one example of a beat matching app that's AI powered. There's one called Pacemaker that got bought by another company. And now there is a new Apple Music feature that will let you make your own DJ sets. And then I often find this is a gateway, this is a stepping stone, gets people interested in music alteration and production, which leads them to the next slide. A new generation of AI that is baked directly into DAWs. So the youngest folks, if you have a Gen Alpha kid, you're looking at someone who grew up during the pandemic with GarageBand probably on their school district issued device. So using a DAW is basically second nature, at least for my kids, and I'm sure for lots of people in the room. And then there's online DAWs like BandLab, which work on your phone. So mobile creation has become something, in fact, there's folks like David, what's his name? The guy who did Soak City. And if you look at almost any modern hip hop artist, they will talk about using their phone and probably BandLab to create stuff. BandLab has something called Song Starter, but it's becoming a widely available feature in almost any DAW that you can get a little generative AI push, a nudge, to send you in the right direction. So you quite don't know what to make yet. It'll give you some hints and get you started, so you can start making stuff and seeing how it feels. There's also things like voice synthesis that allow untrained singers to add a different element to their performance and to demo things and try different things. There's generative AI samples, which are becoming more and more common and often used in creating sounds that don't really exist. Like if you've ever tried to AI generate a church bell, you'll know what I'm talking about. And then there's AI mixing VSTs and plugins that work directly in DAWs. This is slightly more sophisticated. This is someone who's already gotten some musical experience. But these basically can mimic the decision-making process of a highly trained mix engineer. This one guy, Spike, comes to mind, that has trained an AI that will let you, right within the DAW, get mix suggestions that will help you improve your mix. So there's all sorts of new ways for non-musicians to get really easy, inspiring entry points and start making things. And I think that was my last slide. Oh, sorry, it wasn't my last slide, I'm sorry. So audio is emerging. So one thing is that we've been talking about for years in the music business. People don't know what to do with audio. They know what to do with, like Instagram shows, they know what to do with video and with photos. But basically, we're starting to see people use audio for all sorts of interesting new things like voice memos, podcasts, emotes, and video games. And I believe this is going to contribute to more people wanting to add more music, to make their own music so that they don't get copyright strikes. That's how a lot of, like, again, to bring up David, there are some young pop stars who have specifically said, I wanted to post my Fortnite video and I couldn't, so I started making music. And I think we're going to see better and better agentic AI that's really going to accelerate people's progress as they learn to make their own music using a lot of these tools. So anyway, thanks. That is my last slide. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tristra. Great, and then our next speaker is David Stout from University of North Texas, who is a visual and sonic artist specializing in cross-media synthesis, bridging the arts, design, and sciences. And David will tell you more about his work and perspectives now. Thanks so much.
Thank you. First slide. We begin with a dot. You are here. Next slide. I am a visual and sonic artist, and today I'm gonna take a brisk walk through my own sort of creative work. Next slide, please. I'm also a director and a filmmaker, and I have been teaching for 40 years a collaborative, cross-disciplinary performance, and this is a still from one such performance, a mashup between a human detention center and a mega church. Next slide, please. For the last 20-some years, I worked intensively with my collaborator, Corey Metcalf, in a duo called Noisefold. We are an audio-visual group exploring the sonification of real-time procedural animation. Next slide, please. Our interest was in the transcoding of visual data, two-dimensional video textures, and also three-dimensional forms into sound, often very noisy sound, which could then be filtered into other things that were more resemble what we might commonly understand as music, although the world that I come from, with that lineage going back to the Italian futurists, all noise has a potential for music. Next slide, please. This technique was also used for real-time immersive installations that were run off of very small, like two computer networks. Next slide. And as these evolved, they took on a kind of a world within world, or the exploration of sort of parallel interdimensional possibilities by the inclusion of VR within an immersive environment. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. This is an example of an image from a solo performance using the same kind of technique, where it's this actually two three-dimensional forms. The three-dimensional forms are informed by a database of dynamic equations defining three-dimensional space that are then extruded with tuned kinds of noises. And these were controlled through various kinds of sensors, including infrared sensors, much like one plays a theremin. Next slide. This brings us to noise, and the concept of noise that we worked with was coming from a kind of alchemical idea attributed to Aristotle of the idea of prima materia. Noise as the possible field for all possible images and sound, which brings us to AI and diffusion. Next slide. I've been working in the AI, I first started working in the AI image space about 3.5 years ago with a phone app called Wombo Dream, and I did something we were all doing at that point in time, which is a mashup. So this is Francis Bacon and eggs, for those that know the painter Francis Bacon. You can see some attributes of this image that are in his painting style. And this idea of mashups, or the potential of sort of diverse, sort of impossible artistic collaborations across cultures and between different individuals that no longer are on the planet, is a kind of an all-consuming passion of mine. Next image. So this brings us to a few things. The first is the word artificial intelligence. We've been using that term very liberally here. Next slide. But in fact, it's a very, very problematic term because in the larger field, AI, of course, is being used to target civilian populations for bombing raids. It's being used for all kinds of sort of nefarious things and all kinds of beautiful things. So at the point in showing all those previous images is that the idea of working with machines, we have been working with machines that generate material for a very long time. Algorithmic art making goes back to the early 60s, and my engagement with synthetic media goes back to the first synthesizer I touched as an undergrad in 1975. So this isn't in some ways such a new thing. Next slide. I kind of like the idea of AI being automated ideation or an amplified imagination, and maybe what we fear is autonomous instantiation, that there's some kind of empty, soulless vessel that is generating all this material and it's machinic. We've heard this over and over, this distinction between the machine and the human, but I would maintain that the large models are a composite of humanity and are very human in many ways. So the idea of sort of intensive automation, which this medium gives us, but also the amplification and the amplification of imagination. We interface to this through natural language processing, and we sometimes forget the power of our own tongue and the fact that the language itself is a technology, and it's so pervasive that we forget that it exists. And it will be, I think, become more of a way we interact with machines, but not also being very interested in instrumental interfaces. The tongue is not the only way I want to interact with a machine. I also want to interact with my fingers or through my body. I find it to be a very collaborative medium, and as I said before, I'm collaborating with sort of the history of humanity and of human culture. By its nature, it accelerates hybridity if we want to think about the possible aesthetic hybrids that can be created with this medium. As I mentioned in my film yesterday, it's a boundary dissolving medium in the sense that we can traverse time scales and global cultures. And it does not decolonize the imagination, but it reveals to us through the common sort of flood of imagery and sound how atrophied perhaps the general imagination is. It's very revealing, and it challenges us to be more creative. I think that we're moving towards real-time AI and synthetic agents that will be aesthetic in nature, and they may take human forms, but I think they'll take some very fascinating forms, and I think that we haven't seen nothing yet. It's going to get very strange. And I would go from there is that we are instantiating dream time because these models are very associational, and they allow for very sort of non-rational relationships. Next slide, please. So, next slide. This is a series of works that I did early on called Cosmograms, where I focused prompting on the materiality, and this material would be tar, wax, hair, and some other things like flower petals and the movement of reptiles and sea anemones. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. This was going to the same prompt through a different model that's more photographic. Next slide. Next slide. And next slide. Next slide. This piece, in their arms we hold the sky. This is an individual frame, was a commission from Temple Emmanuel in Dallas. Next slide. To celebrate their 150th anniversary. And it was done with, the music was done through more traditional means, synthesizers, VSTs, sample libraries, etc. But the images are all synthetic AI. Next slide. The image you're looking at there is comprised of 200 discrete images that are being controlled by, that are mapped to a particle system that is being controlled by strange attractor algorithms. Next slide. This would be an individual image. In this case, I guess I would say I'm capable of actually drawing that image, but it might take me 2 days to do so. With a project that had over 950 images, you can do the math of how many years it would have taken me just to do the images. So while I want to talk about the empowerment that that would be a Hollywood studio would have to do that project, but I did it by myself with an associate in a 3-month period. Next slide. Next slide. Likewise, these B images were also mapped on particle systems controlled by strange attractor algorithms. Next slide. This brings me to what my current passion is: AI songwriting using Udio and standard electronic music production techniques. And we'll just do a very quick walk through these songs. Next. I'm focusing on writing the lyrics and using those lyrics to really drive the music. And so it's like having an international, global, historic ensemble of incredible capacity. And what I find about this is very therapeutic in that it draws writing out of me that I could never have imagined. I wrote this, some of these are very personal. I wrote this one about my mother, who is an avid Fox News watcher and has talked about the colonization of the mind and my trying to deal with that sort of disconnect. Maybe some of you can relate. We'll just quickly walk through these next ones. This is a Sibient hymn. Next one. This is a African jazz, cyber jazz hymn. Next one. This is a Middle Eastern jazz blues hip hop song. Next one. This is also a kind of Sibient, which is ambient and psychedelic mixed together. This is an electronic piece. Next one. This is a Celtic reel done with some sort of electro pop accents. And the final one. And this is what I'm working on now, an audiovisual opera that explores this sort of dream associational space. That's a kind of a fever dream traveled through the Southwest in an era of social inflammation, immigration sort of tragedy, and people escaping the urban centers. And it's done as a fever dream within the context of time travel and interdimensional realities. That's where I'll close. Thank you very much.
It's amazing work. Thank you, David. And then our final introductory presentation will be by Ted Moore, who's a composer, improviser, and intermedia artist. His work blends sound, visuals, physicality, and technology with performances by ensembles such as the International Contemporary Ensemble and Spectral Quartet. His work has been described as, quote, frankly unsafe by icareifyoulisten.com. I'm very intrigued by that. And Moore's compositions have been showcased globally, including at South by Southwest and the Walker Art Center. As a performer and educator, he uses electronics and collaborates with artists across various mediums. And he's currently on faculty at the Peabody Institute of Johns Hopkins. So thanks very much, Ted. Look forward to your talk.
Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about this, I guess, thing I've put on the slide here, that I am pro artists who are using their own data and training their own models to make art. And I want to talk about the implications that I see for creativity in this distinction. I made this slide deck today. It's a little overwrought, perhaps. So I'm just going to do it, and we'll go with it. Okay. So this is a reduced idea of how we think about how these systems work. We know there's an AI model. We train the model using some data, and then we generate some outputs. Of course, these are very complex systems. So there's a lot of choices and decisions that need to go into how these things work. I mean, a ton of engineering goes into how the model gets trained, decisions about the model, and of course about the data and how we assess the outputs. And one thing is like what kind of model we might use. I'm going to sort of skip over that. But another thing is, what is the data we actually want to train on? For music, what is the data that we're going to use here, that we're going to train our model to have the model come to learn about, to know about? And of course, when we do this training, we also need to give the model some feedback. So it'll generate some material, and we need to tell the model, is this good? Is it musical? Is it music? Using that information that we give the model, then it is able to adjust itself and hopefully make music that is gooder, that is more musical. Right? This is the training loop that we have. When corporate models are trained, it is companies that are answering these questions. What data should be used? What is musical? What is good? And we as listeners, we really tend to just take these answers at face value. Something generates some sound and we say, yes, it is music. Great, okay, next. Let's try it again, regenerate. I'm not here to say like all corporations are bad or something, that's not what I'm saying, but I'm trying to think about what are the implications for creativity that the fact that this is generally what we see and what we're given and what we're using. Also, I'm sort of bouncing off this. This is not really what I'm talking about, but I think it is related, that these companies are also often using copyright material that is not authorized for use in this. So if we break this down a little bit more, we can think about, okay, the companies are deciding what to train the data on. They get to decide the answer to the question, what is music? Should we put into these systems Bach? Should we put in Beethoven? Should we put in Schoenberg, Kendrick Lamar, Boulez, Ted Moore? Right? There's actually a political action going on right there where we decide what is the music? What is music? When we make these music generation systems. Another point is that these systems are really sort of interpolation machines. They're going to generate more of the same of what they've been trained on, rather than new expressive possibilities, which of course, as artists, new expressive possibilities is really important to us. Of course, also, these companies are deciding what is good. So they're making decisions about what is good, and we are listening to those results and just assuming that these companies are making assessments about what is good, and we should go along with those assessments, rather than thinking critically for ourselves, do I think that is good? What do I think is good that might be different from what this company thinks is good? And what implications might that have for my creative practice? So if we consider using these tools as a creative act, here are three implications, I think. Number one, it takes these decisions, these important decisions, away from the artists. And that to me is really scary and sort of sad. That as artists, we're not making the decisions for ourselves. Number two, it uses corporate assessment criteria about what is good and what is music, instead of our own aesthetic assessment criteria. And number three, this has been talked about elsewhere at this conference, but it converges these answers about what is good and what is music towards a homogenization of what was in the training set. And it sort of reifies this, because if it only trains on a certain answers of what is music, the model will only generate those things, and then we come to this idea of agreeing with the model that that is what music is. And things that this music generation model doesn't generate isn't music. And that's concerning. So that's sort of the negative case. Now I'll make the positive case about why artists should train their own models and use their own data. And these two arguments, I think, can stand separate from each other. But here's the positive case. So all these choices and decisions that can be made here, what if we had artists make all these decisions and do the assessment at the output about whether it is good, and feedback that information to the model and have the model train knowing about what I think is good, not about what somebody else thinks is good or what a company thinks is good. If we train on our own data, it's more personal. It is the data that I think is musical. It's more unique because it's specific to me. And I think those two things together are going to make it more expressive. Also, the artist making all these decisions as part of the process tells a story about the artist's thinking and creativity and decision-making and frustrations and struggles. And this sort of story really reveals intentionality, to use Chris's term, and that intentionality draws in listeners to want to hear, oh, interesting, the artist made those decisions, let me listen and then think about how those decisions and intentions are shaping the musical outputs. And lastly, and I think most importantly, if as artists we're making all these decisions at all these different parts of the process, what is the data? What type of model should I use? How should I assess the outputs and give that information back to the model, et cetera, et cetera? There's a huge combinatorial possibilities that this creates. And the huge amount of possibilities this creates is a divergent and flourishing of artistic creativity and artistic possibilities. And so for me, this is a way in which AI can have a flourishing of artistic creativity rather than the convergence and homogenization of the answers to what is music and what is good. So I say, use AI to make art, but don't give up your agency to other people. Use your own data, train your own models.
Thanks, Ted. If you will bear with me, I'm going to grab a seat so that I can sit down, if that's okay. Mostly just because I feel a little bit awkward kind of looming over the table here. If that's all right. Thanks, I appreciate it. And so we'll move into the discussion portion of our panel now. And just from my point of view, I do have some topic questions that I hope will connect with each of your work. Thanks, Helen. But I do welcome you to respond to each other as we go as well. It strikes me that the creation of music or musical activities comprise many processes. And I wonder where you all think the creativity is in these processes. Which aspects of musical behaviors do you take to be creative or have the potential for creativity, as perhaps distinct from other more craft aspects of creating music or sort of mundane details? Where do you see the creativity in musical behaviors?
I mean, if we're talking about someone who doesn't think of themselves as an artist, as everyone here at this table does, I would argue that people often don't even know, they don't even think about it as creativity. Is it satisfying? And they have the intention, perhaps, to get in contact with an emotion, even if that emotion is like, haha, like, I'm gonna get you with this one. And so it's kind of a difficult, where would people draw the line with someone making a mashup and sending it to a friend? Is that creative? I don't know. It sounds like maybe yes, maybe no.
Well, I think music is one of the most complex of the art forms, and there are many areas that a composer might choose to focus on. So asking that question can be really, I think, you're going to get very diverse answers, because I think just from the discussion that we had here, we've seen a lot of different concerns and different possibilities. So the kinds of things that you were discussing, those are absolutely musical acts from people that may be non-musicians or don't have that much training, and they may be a very different concern than Ted might have in what he's doing.
May I ask what some of your concerns are?
Well, in the context of what I was just talking about now, and in the context of what Ted's very convincing argument about training personal models, I've been working with the exact opposite, which is to kind of query the cultural imagination. And so I'm wanting to play with this kind of global consciousness, if you will, or exploring music as a kind of a prosthetic of consciousness. And that's my interest, so I'm wanting to work at that sort of meta level, and maybe certain details about how a melody is constructed is a little less important to me, but not always.
I was going to say that the question also points out that the word creative or creativity is probably bigger than we give it credit for, because like when my 7-year-old walks through the living room just like making up a song off the top of his head, like that's creative, but it's creative in a very different way than when a composer sits down and like makes an expressive act, which is also very different than than sharing a mixtape, right? And we'd probably they're all creative, but there's like adjectives before that creativity that I think this conversation like brings out the need for.
I wonder about taking this in a direction we haven't quite gone, which is listening to all the discussions these last 2 days. To me, one thing that's risen to the surface is the difference between what I would call disposable art, almost like single-use plastic, and something that's built to have a shelf life. And what you have to invoke when you want to build something with a shelf life, whether that's sharing it with lots of people at one time or hoping there'll be a horizontal impact over time, calls into play all sorts of things that AI systems on their own are not capable of yet. Revision, proliferating options and choosing among them, back-chaining, starting from the end and working backwards, all sorts of things that are hidden aspects of the creative process that are not yet automatable, that are entirely the domain of human beings, and that fill out the answer to your question.
I think there's another part of it, which is that, you know, like I recently saw an interview with the CEO of Suno, and he said that he thinks music making is not fun.
Mikey, yeah.
He said people don't think music making is fun anymore. That was like his take, which I just think is silly. But I mean, being creative is fun. It's something that we do because it is fun, because it is hard, and because it is fun, and because it's rewarding, and it's interesting, and you learn things. And so this is part of the distinction too, that should be, you know, part of the process is that we do it because we enjoy it. And so, yes, this is not just some types of using AI are less fun, and things that are harder are more fun.
And it's
Can
funny. I was just gonna
You go.
say, just to jump off what you were saying, there's the other interesting thing that's happening, at least in the popular music world, is a lot of artists are creating things, iterating, putting stuff out really quickly, and watching to see sort of what takes, right? And then that horizontal spread, I guess you might consider that the horizontal, determines what is a successful piece of art. And then you take a look at that and you go back to the process and you create some more along those same lines. So in some ways it's very different from our, maybe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, our more traditional understanding of what someone sitting down, having an idea, having a lot of training, and then having a really distinct intention to create something. It's more like, I'm gonna make this stuff on the fly, almost intuitively, instinctively, and see what sticks. It's like throwing so much audio spaghetti against the wall. But that could be very meaningful for the people who say, yeah, I like this, I'm gonna play this over and over again and put this in my video.
I do worry, though, about being inundated with disposable art and what that might do to art that's aiming to have a shelf life, being crowded out of the market and muscled out of the scene because there's just so much to digest all the time that's coming at you. I mean, that's a potential risk of that.
Tony, can I pick up on that point? Because I wonder to what extent the value of art and the value of creativity art is inherent to a creative process towards a work versus the creative activity of an artist in the world, somebody who's connected with the world socially, who cares about what's going on, and that when we try to identify the creative process or processes, to what extent is that encapsulated by the act of note choosing or the act of feature choosing, as opposed to an artist being embedded in the world as being something essential to a creative process? I wonder what you all think about this perspective.
It's kind of both.
Yeah.
It's both. I don't think it's separable. Beethoven couldn't have written symphonies if there weren't a whole mess of other people writing symphonies that kept orchestras busy and so forth. So he absolutely was embedded in a milieu, but there was no other mind like Beethoven. And whatever he did in the privacy of his studio was unique and couldn't be duplicated by anyone. Can I throw in another thing that I feel has been implicit in the conversations but not explicit, which is level of risk. And one of the things, in addition to the homogeneity of the large models, is that they're very risk averse. And one of the things that's kind of amazing about human beings is we are able to take on risk that seems to be against our best interests. You know, we heard somebody say, don't be a musician and such and so forth. Well, that's because people will take on that risk to do something they care about and they love. And that requires going to the edge cases and the outlier situations where you're just not sure how it's going to land. It's a little bit gaming the system to flood the world with every possible option of it and to see what's going to hit. It's an interesting way of doing it. But the level of craftsmanship that could be involved in order to do that has to be relatively low if you're going to do that with any speed, you know. So these are these interesting questions about how will, I'm very suspicious that any of these systems will ever aim to be a Ted Moore or a Beethoven or a David, you know, because it's too risky. And, you know, we know that Van Gogh sold one painting during his lifetime. No one wants to say, oh my God, that ChatGPT piece from 30 years ago, that was a masterpiece and we didn't realize it, you know. They're not interested in that at all. It's all about the immediate gratification. And we have to be very careful, I think, about stepping into a world that moves at that speed and has that low level of demand.
A model can become a Ted Moore if I train it on my own data,
Right.
and really collect what do I want this model to know about, and then it becomes really useful in what it generates because it already it's been streamlined to point at the things which are riskier things, but it's pointing at those things.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
that's
Exactly.
part of the
Yeah,
argument.
but risk here is always in order for it to be risky, you just have to turn up or turn down the probability, right? So it's like this idea of risk or creativity or like origination being a function of probability in a model versus like something else. Like I don't think that what makes Beethoven like really interesting is a question of him like being like, what's the least probable thing I can do right now, right? That's not the thought process behind that. And I think that's a difference between what we mean by computational creativity or like a probabilistic model that's like generating new ideas for you versus like human origination.
I think, and I'll just put this out there because this is what one of my articles was about, was that, and not in all cases, but what Beethoven is doing is trying to normalize the irregular. So he will introduce something that is very rare, and then he will keep reasserting it over and over again to show that it's plausible within the reality that he's creating. It's like a world building. And we've been talking about this offline about, well, we see that in Netflix shows like Severance and so forth, where some initial stipulation gets made, and then it's the carrying out of that which makes it feel real on its own terms. I feel that's what Beethoven is doing.
There's an equation called the Boltzmann equation. I apologize if I get this wrong to the scientists in the room, but it has to do with how much energy it takes for an electron to escape an atom, I think. And the most probabilistic place for an electron to be is where it's expected to be. And in order for it to be somewhere where it's less expected, it takes a lot of energy. And so I think the metaphor, the reason I like this is because in order to become salient, in order to come out of the most probabilistic mid, is it takes a lot of energy. And so that's sort of the case. It's also that energy expense is risky because taking all that time and sweat to try to make something that sticks out from the onslaught of many AI-generated things, it takes that energy, and that's where the risk is.
I have a question that is arising from Tristra's presentation that reminded me of a story of something that happened to me many years ago where I was speaking with a colleague about musical performance, and this person had developed a coding language that allowed him to produce music. And he explained to me that he liked this because he didn't have to learn, the motoric and go through the musical training in order to play, but instead he could sort of, offload a lot of those technical skills to coding and focus on other creative matters. And at first, as like a pianist, I was like, no, you can't just skip that. And then I sort of have arrived at a more kind of accepting position, but that yes, that is a form of musical performance, but it leads to a question of, how does technology, and I won't say AI because I appreciate that we should be careful about the many different meanings of this term, but how does technology change the musical process? Not to do the same thing offloading it, but to actually make a new kind of musical activity?
I love that question, and I think what I was thinking of as you were asking it was the fact that we have, I mean, in a lot of cultures, everyone is a musician. Anyone can make music. Anyone is a singer. We've gotten into this really bizarre headspace where we've really limited musical creativity to a very specialized group of people who are very technically talented and bring great things to the world. Dude, I mean, not to say that these things are all on the same level, but maybe I like to think about AI and in general where music tech is heading as folk music 2.0. So instead of standing around the piano singing songs together, which people used to do when they would sing ancient medieval ballads, right? Like child ballads were sung in Indiana up until World War II, excuse me. So all that feels kind of like, still recycling the same stuff over and over again. Folk songs are extremely algorithmic and the way they're put together and reshaped. And anyway, all that weirdness to say, I think we're looking at, again, a falling of the barrier of, I can't play with audio, right? I have a voice memo. I can remix my voice memo. I can add weird effects to it and send it back to my friend. Like, you're already starting to think a little tiny bit like a musician or composer, which wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago without, all right, we're gonna sit down at the piano and learn. I mean, I would argue, so yeah.
And I think that's absolutely tremendous, but we've also learned a lesson in the pandemic that not everybody has access to computers and a cell phone and good internet. And so if we're really committed to the democracy of this, which we've heard a lot about, we have to make sure that we're also serving that need.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not just in the United States too, because we've got countries where they don't have electricity or solar power or anything like that, and this hasn't come up very much, but I mean, they're building nuclear reactors to run the large language model servers. That's totally out of the picture of many, many, many communities across the world. And so if the democracy of this is really important, we have to do so much to build up the infrastructure to make that prosper.
I think there is a concern about de-skilling, which I think we have to take seriously. And as much as I'm a proponent of using tech as this kind of prosthesis that I was talking about, embodiment is really important. And musical embodiment and musical communication between living beings is really important. So as much as I'm very excited about this tech, I feel like these other things we have to drill down on keeping that alive.
I'll throw in a little anecdote here that I was talking to some of our music ed PhD students about AI, and I was like, are you worried about this? And they were like, no, because like, what in the world is AI going to, like, what take away from like middle school band? Like, kids don't take middle school band to sound good, right? They go into middle school band to like learn how to play an instrument and learn to play together, and like that's a thing that will continue to be a separate pathway from AI music generation. Yeah.
Can I jump on one thing too about something, Chris? I wanted to support something you said earlier about intentionality. I read in a linguistics book that the average gap in a conversation for human beings is less than 1 second. And that's because we're already forming what we're going to say, as my wife often reminds me, but before the other person has finished talking. These large language models, as we know, only know what they're saying, I'm saying that in quotes, after they've said it. They don't form their thought and figure out how am I going to say it. And that's really what intentionality is all about.
So I may just expand this question a little bit and maybe perhaps make it more precise. So thinking about the relationship between technology and a creative process, one could make the argument that all technology changes our creative process. I mean, being a pianist, one example I give my students is that when I'm actually touching the piano, I have different ideas than if I'm just writing, away from the piano. But in the context of this conference, I wonder what you all think about whether there is some qualitative difference in the kinds of technologies that musicians are using today, say comparing a piano versus the technologies that you all use in your work or that we've seen throughout the conference as they both change the creative process, but is there a qualitative difference in the types of tools and the types of changes that they're making to the way we make music?
Okay, so,
And if so, what?
I think in one sense, no, because music is this medium that has always been mediated through technology. Like you pick up a clarinet, and that's a piece of technology that's mediating your musical expression, and so in that sense, no, but in another sense, this might be the first time where a technology can create something which you can mistake for human production, which is like a different kind of, to me, that would be the difference, is that this is a technology that you can, like your clarinet can never play itself, right?
Sadly.
But Suno can, right? And that would be the difference.
And just because I know we've chatted before about like automata and the history of these robots that pluck the strings, and so but you would see this also as departing from a technology like that, right?
Yeah, there's this beautiful automaton of a woman playing the organ, and it's like a real organ, and this robot is like pushing down the keys, and this is 1786 or something like that. But like nobody is mistaking her for a person, right? That's the difference, I think.
I had the thought during the conference about one issue with technology is obsolescence. This has come up with anybody who uses Finale, went out of business. And so everybody in my generation, like all our music is in Finale, and now I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And learning a new system from scratch where in order to function properly, is practically automated. And the more we give ourselves over to the software that may disappear in a year or two. I was walking down the hall, I was wondering, what if all of a sudden there were no more piano tuners? And then, well, you couldn't play the piano, and there goes pianos. Well, that's what happened with that software. And so, that's another issue that this kind of brings into play that really hasn't been there before.
I definitely feel like using AI brings ideas that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And in some ways, that's the intention. When I train a model and then I'm exploring the outputs of the model, it often will come up with some sound or that I might not have come upon had I sat at the blank page forever. And that's really exciting and really valuable. So this is part of the goal, is to shake myself out of those patterns or whatever and find new ideas.
In a moment, we'll invite questions from the audience, yeah? And if you do feel that you have a question, I would invite you to come to the microphone. Are there any questions in the audience at this point? Okay, great. So actually, at this point, why don't we start with audience questions, please?
A little bit arcane, but kind of specific sort of thing. I'd ask ChatGPT in the middle of the night, but it would just tell me what I want to hear. But I'm interested with this, technology mediating music and back and forth, and also that axis that was shown on the I think it was the Margaret Bowden chart, expected, unexpected. Seems like one of the most driving things about music is related to expectation. Being able to synchronize our activities is something that primitive humans decided, or they discovered, had an adaptive advantage, being able to vocalize at the same time, step at the same time. But there was no yardstick in time. There was no clock to do that. It had to be self-organized. It had to be based on having a shared prediction of when that next, hoot should be emitted or that next step should be taken. And it seems like that led to things like marching and dancing and playing music, and has proliferated in culture in a lot of different ways, all the way down to, whistle while you work or whatever. But now we live in an electronic age where we have a shared clock, and it occurs to me like our interests even aligned with what's evolving in terms of machine learning anymore, because where in that realm, and I'm hoping there are some places, where does self-organized entrainment solve any kind of a problem that can't be solved just by having a clock and some interrupts? Where is that kind of sense of a rising potential that hits some critical point that actually means something, like when you hear a drop in a dance piece of music, or a workout instructor says 3, 2, 1, go? That's something we all feel as humans. It's very much part of what drives music. But does that still solve a problem that is something that is part of what's evolving with machine learning, or is it just that it just simulates that to entertain us? And if that's the case, will the fact that we don't need it anymore mean that rhythm will just become something vestigial? Or I don't know, hope that makes some sense.
I can say something short and sweet about this, which I think that's part. I'm not going to answer your question and say something because it's a really cool question. Is that I think that's what's so cool about David's take on this, is that what you're seeing in the AI generation is the sum of decades, hundreds, thousands of years of human music history, and our use of music for particular things, like feeling the beat, like dancing with each other, and then you play around with that. I think that's a really great take on this stuff. But then also your skepticism shows the other side of that, is that it's not doing it, right? The music's not dancing, the music is not entraining, the music is not singing, the music's not feeling a downbeat. And I think that's sort of that is definitely a distinction. Yeah.
It's also worth mentioning that's very cultural. So it's certainly widespread, but gamelan music, the pulse changes. In something like Siberian nomadic singing, they only sing by themselves because it's very timbral and they're not that interested in pitch. So there's really an incredible range across the world. I think more the risk is that rhythm being so infectious and so characteristic of Western music takes over and becomes the only thing that people care about, and things that are not like gagaku music. I mean, for instance, I at least thought, oh, well, all the world's dance music must be to a beat. But no, the world's longest existing dance tradition is not played to a steady beat. So, it's just, again, an example of how the data helps shape the output and so on.
Yeah, it's really important to remember that there are deep biases in all the data sets. And there are folks, say, in India who come from classical music families that are trying to address this, but there's all sorts of really, really weird fundamental issues. Like we worked once with an Iranian classical composer, and he was just saying he just couldn't get the tuning right, like with a lot of synths and stuff like that. I know it's got a lot more flexibility now, and there's more nuance and like MIDI 2.0 and stuff, but it's an ongoing issue.
Are there other questions from the audience or on Zoom? Otherwise, I could continue. No. Okay. Great. Well, I wonder if you all believe that. How to say this? Actually, until there are other questions in the audience, one thing that I did want to make sure to have an opportunity to do in our panel is to have you have an opportunity to respond directly to each other's presentations. We've already had some opportunity to do that throughout our discussion, but if there were other points that you noticed in each other's presentations that you would like to pick up on, I want to make sure you have the opportunity to raise those.
As giving perhaps the crankiest presentation, I was struck by the optimism in the other in y'all's presentations, but I was also struck by the fact that the positivity comes about from using generative AI as agentic AI, that because any generative AI can become agentic when you're like, well, I'm not going to treat it as the end product, I'm going to use it for something. And everything that we were discussing is using AI for something and not treating it as a final product, which I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah, I've thought to myself that if folks from all of these companies that make these large language model systems were here, they would hear there's almost no interest in autonomous AI. we are dazzled by the possibilities of AI as a tool and have seen incredible demonstrations of that. But it working on its own may be a good way for the system to sort of build and become more sophisticated, but we don't really need that tool, you know? And it's interesting that that's the one that gets put out into the world with greater force.
It's funny how everyone is invested in a solution in search of a problem. You know, Suno and Udio have gotten hundreds of millions of dollars of VC capital to create something that is kind of, you know, it's going to be one of those things I think are 10 years from now, everyone's going to look back and go like, oh, you know, like petfood.com. And they have also been really skillful, like a lot of tech folks who go into the music industry. They've been very skillful at alienating every single stakeholder, including from major labels to artists. Like, good job, guys. Oh, this is being recorded, so anyway, hope you hear this, Mikey. Yeah, very, very condescending towards the music industry and towards individual artists, from what I've heard. So, yeah, way to go, guys.
I wanted to speak to this idea of risk adversity. That in a sense, and my playing with the large music models is really a kind of a hacker's perspective to try to make it take risks or go somewhere that it isn't really designed to go, but might be sitting there in the latent space. I mean, that's the whole game of it, actually. Yeah. And in terms of the positivity, I contemplated this because there are a lot of things I'm very concerned about. But I thought I would share my passion for this medium, but at the same time, this issue of using a large model where the people that have contributed to it have not been paid, and or all of my labor, which is considerable, thousands of hours, and I don't actually, well, I may own the text that I write, but all the additional production I do is not going to be compensated. And all of the money goes to these large corporations and none to any the beginning contributors or the end composers are seeing none of it. It's a super bummer. and I would love to see this conference have some of those CEOs or representatives. Because
they're already like they can't wait. They can't wait to talk to us about these things.
Are you being facetious?
Very much so. Yeah, Gen Xing hard here.
Well, you know, along the lines, and it's one of the reasons I think this conference has been so important. I was thinking that, and don't sneer, but that one of the great human accomplishments collectively is air travel. That we turned flying in a piece of metal several miles in the air into the safest form of transportation, and millions of people go all sorts of places they could never get to every day, to countries that don't like each other, and there's restaurants and your baggage gets there. There's redundancies and fail-safes to preserve your safety. If something goes wrong, there's black boxes and accountability. Even libertarians will put on their seatbelts because everybody is supposed to do the same thing. And it seems to me that what air travel has done for our bodies, AI is doing for our minds. It's enabling us to travel faster and farther than we have ever been able to do before. And wouldn't it be nice if collectively we could arrive at that same kind of achievement in terms of building it? And that's where I try to find hope. Like we did it with air travel, more or less. It's imperfect, but it's pretty darn amazing that it is as safe as it is. And so many people from all walks of life can participate, so.
Maybe one more audience question and then we'll wrap
Sure,
up
yeah.
soon.
I was thinking back to, I can't remember which panelist it was, I apologize, but you were talking about intent, the intention of the creator of the work. And I think in some ways it's sort of what, in my mind, makes the difference between an activity and an art form, or, an activity in creating art. It's the intent of the person doing it, right? And so I'm curious though, but if there's, maybe of studies or you've put thought into this or yourself, we tend to project, right? We tend to project and infer things, like we see something and we build a story or a narrative, assume some intention on the part of the creator of that work. And so I do wonder if in the future we might look at things that were created by AI and, you know, maybe not us literally, but maybe in a few generations, people who have sort of become acclimated to, you know, that kind of stuff, we no longer see that, oh, that's AI, you know, and we are able to sort of get some of those same feelings and things with these future people, get some of those same feelings from works that weren't created by a person with any intent, but are just something that you can project your own sort of, you know, ideas of intention on. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I'll jump in just to say that I think one of the things that the art that we feel most connected to does is it constantly reminds us it is intentional. And in fact, it uses every technique it can to reach out to another human brain and say, I mean what I say and I want you to pay attention to it. And that's a telltale signature of those AI large language model creativity, is they don't do that because they don't know what that means.
So I think there's an optimistic and a pessimistic take on this. The pessimistic take would relate this back to the 1870s, 1880s, when folks were totally sure that nobody would ever empathize with this newfangled technology of recording, right? That that music was a live thing and nobody was going to emotionally connect with something coming out of a phonograph, right? So nobody's gonna buy a phonograph, no. Listen to the radio, why would you listen to music on a radio, right? And of course, that was wrong, right? And so it's very possible that in 20, 30 years, we will be finding intention in computers. I don't think that's true because I think about the metaphor of like I think about like fresh baked bread as a analogy here. That like you can get great bread from the store, but sometimes you just want fresh baked bread from like the local bakery, or you want to bake your own bread. And even if it doesn't taste better, you still like it more. And that's, I think, part of what this intentionality is going to continue to be like tagged into human-made music.
I'd love to throw in the idea of mistakes, of humans signaling their humanity by making mistakes, incorporating flaws, again, signaling the intentionality, but kind of almost as a counter programming. If we have this perfectly polished product that we can produce, maybe humans are gonna start being sloppy, grubby, you know, kind of a little bit more crust punk or intentionally odd. And you can hear that in a lot of music. People are incorporating found sound. Like you'll hear a pop track that's 8 minutes long that all of a sudden shifts randomly from genre to genre, incorporates all sorts of weird interruptions, but then never kind of goes back to the beginning. And that's something that AI doesn't tend to do. So I'm wondering what the future of mistakes as human signals.
Yeah, and I might just supplement these comments that there are studies about, listeners' knowledge of a source, which is perhaps a form of an answer to this question about whether you know that it's human or think that it's human, and how that has changed our perception. I've heard Chris talk about this topic as well.
I think that it's
go
called the
ahead.
IKEA effect. I think it's a psychology that in psychology, some psychologists have called it this, where if you make something yourself, you assign more value to it.
I see.
And the study was they actually like sold things to people or had people assess value, and if they were going to have to put it together themselves, they were willing to assign more value, pay more money for the thing. So it's like very interesting.
Just by way of a quick conclusion, I hope that you agree that this has been an illuminating panel, and from my perspective, taking away from this discussion, what I'm seeing is a plurality. I'm seeing many different answers to these questions about creativity, many different uses, difficult to systematize, to unify, and to theorize because of that diversity, but I find that very exciting, and I find that frankly protecting some humanity, if I may. So I do appreciate all of your perspectives, and I hope that you all have enjoyed this conversation.